Theresa May dropped in on a new council flat today. The Stonegrove estate in Edgware is Barnet Council's flagship regeneration scheme. Hundreds of old homes are being replaced by new ones. The Prime Minister claims she's on a personal mission to fix the housing crisis.
We know there are lots of planning permissions out there. I want to see the houses being built, the homes being built with those planning permissions, so that we can really see a new spurt to ensure that younger generations, that people are able to get their foot on that housing ladder and have a secure home for themselves and their family.
At last month's party conference, Mrs May hinted at a U-turn on decades of Conservative policy.
A new generation of council houses to help fix our broken housing market.
But council leaders in London say their hands are tied by government restrictions on what local authorities can borrow. This is King's Crescent in Stoke Newington, another estate regeneration scheme. The new blocks wouldn't be out of place on any of London's upmarket housing developments. There's even a show home. That's because the only way Hackney Council can afford to pay for the project is by selling more than half the flats on the open market. Hackney has become a property developer.
We just need some of the freedoms that are available to housing associations. We've got a large stock in Hackney, nearly 30,000 homes, but we're not allowed to borrow against that to invest in new housing.
Phase 1 of this redevelopment will boast almost 500 new homes, but just 79 will be traditional council flats. And Hackney has 13,000 families on its waiting list.
I've got 3 daughters. One of them lives with her in-laws. I've got 2 still living at home, and they're in their 20s. Mid-20s, you know, and they can't afford, and there's nothing on the social housing list either, so that's hard.
City Hall believes new homes need to be built at a rate of 66,000 a year to satisfy demand in London. This week, the Mayor published his budget wish list.
We'd like to see an immediate and substantial boost to the investment in new affordable housing, investment in infrastructure, powers for us to bring forward public and other land into the system, and crucially a relaxation around councils' freedoms to invest in new housing.
For now, authorities like Hackney must come up with other ways to fund additional homes, even if it means selling flats like these for more than £900,000. And joining me now to work out just what the Chancellor should be doing next Wednesday is our late debate brains trust, the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, Rushnara Ali, the Conservative MP for Hendon, Matthew Offord, and for the Liberal Democrats, the Carshalton and Wallington MP, Tom Brake. Welcome all of you. Matthew, can I talk to you first of all? Theresa May was in Barnet, your local council. I believe you were with her today. Can you clear up one thing for us? Is it Conservative policy to build new council homes or simply to replace existing ones?
Well, as the Prime Minister announced in a statement today, as you said, within my constituency, she has a personal objective now to increase the amount of home ownership. And that means ensuring that people are able to get on the housing ladder, both through the right to have a housing scheme, but also she's making monies available for infrastructure projects to ensure that regeneration can actually occur. There are a lot of projects that are in the pipeline that can't come through until that money is spent. But it is now our intention, certainly, that we want to see everyone being able to afford to own their own home in the capital.
But what about council houses? I mean, Tom, you presumably...
You asked Matthew a question, but he didn't actually answer it, which is the government in favour of building more council homes? And certainly what we're seeing in my borough, which is the Liberal Democrat borough of Sutton, they have just started building 90 new council homes, the first time in 30 years that has been possible. And I think we do need to see a wide range of organisations providing homes, and that does include councils, it includes housing associations, and of course it includes some of the initiatives that the government have launched in relation to making it easier for people to buy property. So it's got to be a portfolio of measures.
Rushnara, you must know from your constituency, which has a huge number of social homes, there's a crying need for old-fashioned council estates, isn't there?
I've got over 20,000 people on the housing waiting list, and what would be really helpful is if the government stopped just talking about it and actually invested the resources needed to build council housing as well as other social housing through housing associations as well. What we've found over a number of years is that property developers have been allowed to build with a small element of social housing, but it doesn't keep up with the demand for affordable and social housing. And so I think when when Theresa May talks about council housing, she needs to put her money where her mouth is, and she needs to make sure that those targets are being met, because London has got this unprecedented crisis, and it's not just those with the most need, it's across the board, and the government needs to stop talking and take action.
Matthew, isn't it slightly absurd when you see stories like that one in Hackney, where the local council has to turn property developer and flog off flats at 900k just so it can replace old council houses?
Well, there's a couple of things that I need to establish. First of all, the number of council houses under this government since 2010 has increased over 250,000. Where if you look under the last Labour government, we're looking at about 144,000 in 13 years.
That's not true.
And you say about Hackney. Now, I'll take the local authority of Barnet. When I was a councillor there, my council colleagues, and they've continued to do this, they've managed to build homes more than ever before. Now, we saw the Stonegrove estate there, 1,000 new homes. 45% of those are for affordable housing. So it can be done. I think there needs to be a political will on behalf of local authorities, rather than saying the government needs to keep putting more money in. It needs political will.
Is that affordable housing to buy or rent?
Well, when you talk about buy or rent, of the 360,000 that the government built across the country since 2010, 240,000 of them are affordable rent.
Can I just say, we built 2 million homes while we were in government. This government has had a very low number of properties built in London for social and affordable housing. Boris Johnson encouraged private developers to build, but many of those properties, including in my constituency, were off-plan sales for foreign investors. And up and down the city, you've got properties that are not fit for purpose, that are basically for private purchases over 800,000, 900,000, over 1 million. That doesn't address the housing, council housing and social housing shortage, or the house price hikes that people can't keep up with.
You criticise Boris Johnson, but he
right.
still started more new homes in London in his final year than Sadiq Khan did in his first year.
In his final year, when the pressure, the housing pressure, finally he came to terms with that. But the fact is, he only built a few thousand properties that were actually in the social and affordable sphere. Most of them were in private hands that he could point to and say, I've built all these homes, but actually they weren't fit for purpose. They weren't for people who can hang on. They weren't for people who desperately need housing. You know, I've got teachers, doctors, surgeons who can't afford to buy homes in London because there aren't enough opportunities for them to get onto the housing ladder. So it is the responsibility of the government to provide more subsidised opportunities, encourage local councils to build, and take the restrictions away. So we've got a proper system of providing housing in our country.
It's interesting to argue about whether Sadiq or Boris has built more or fewer than each other, but I think the fundamental problem is that we have a major shortage of housing. The Liberal Democrats, we estimate that it's something like 300,000 homes a year that need to be built. That is not going to happen unless there is very substantial government investment. What we hope might be announced next week in relation to the budget is figures of £100 billion to be invested over a 10-year period in infrastructure.
That's a very ambitious figure. It's not going to be that high, surely,
£100 billion over 10 years, actually 10 billion in a year, in the context of a government budget, is not actually that large an amount, but that is money that will be invested in housing principally, but also infrastructure. And we think this is achievable because at the moment, of course, it is still cheap to borrow money. The government can borrow money very easily. And the strange thing, of course, is that the government actually give local authorities money so that they can buy shopping centres, so they can buy office blocks, but they don't seem to want to give local authorities the power to build new council homes. And that is what we would like to see.
Matthew, the Tories are still wedded to home ownership, but do you accept that there needs to be a lot more social housing in somewhere like London, where the market values of properties mean that they are always going to be affordable to many people here?
Well, yes, you're right, but I think the country is still wedded to home ownership. People want to own their own home. It's as simple as that.
That's not surprising, but in somewhere like London, it's just not possible.
Well, it is possible. As I said, in terms of Barnet, the regeneration has gone on there. We saw the Stonegrove estate, we have the West Hendon estate, we have the Graham Park estate, we have Bittersea Hill estate. We have huge amounts of regeneration. But if you look at some of the other local authorities, including Liberal Democrat Richmond, for example, they're simply not building properties. Bromley, Conservative controlled, admittedly, but places like Barnet are more than playing their part in terms of the London economy.
Richmond is actually Conservative.
I apologise, but even so, places like Richmond are not building enough property. please.
But there's an issue with inner London where there's a shortage of land, and what we've had over the years is we've had very high numbers of house building projects, but we've had to work with private developers. Our council has had to work with private developers in order to get the social housing element. The government, particularly under Boris, I have to say, actually made it easier for housing developers to have a smaller number of properties that were provided for social housing under Section 106. So, you know, you put local authorities in an impossible situation where they're not getting the supply they need, even with private developers. So what I want to see is councils having more flexibility to do the house building, because otherwise you run out of land and you don't address the housing shortage, especially in London. And
I think Matthew needs to be careful about the definition of what's affordable, because of course an affordable rent, often 80% of the market rent in London, there are very many people who can't afford to rent at an affordable rent, and therefore more council properties for many people is the only way in which they're going to get housed in a decent home.
Matthew, I know you want to come in there. I'm afraid we've run out of time as always, so I'm going to have to stop all of you. Thank you very much to you three for coming in. The Late Debate will be back again next month. Until then, thank you to all my guests, to Ian, Rashnara, Matthew and Tom, but most of all, thank you for watching. Good night.